everyone, and welcome to our session on fraud and its impact across the value chain. I'm Max, and I'm leading the Global Risk Operations Group for Payoneer. And together with me here is Meirav, the Director of Partnerships and Innovation for Riskified. We invite you to take this special and unique journey with us to uncover the various sophisticated fraud types and how we detect and prevent them. We will start with some basics, then cover the different types of offenders, the recent trends we see on the rise due to COVID-19, and share ways and technologies we use to outplay these fraudsters. Our journey will start with the sellers, with the fraud that is committed by sellers. Later on, we will go to collusion cases. These are cases when the seller and the fraudster is de facto the same person. And finally, we will discuss buyer fraud. We will, of course, offer examples and elaborate a bit about the solutions and the technologies we use. So let's go to seller fraud. Seller fraud is a very complex and sophisticated fraud. It contains pure fraud, but also abuse and various attempts to game the platform. As you can see on screen, we refer to seller fraud addressing four main categories. The first category would be product and listing fraud. This category covers cases when the underlying issue is with the product or the listing. So, for instance, when the seller is trying to sell counterfeit items or illegal goods, or even copies listings from his competitors. Other abusive fraud listings and pricing techniques are also considered as part of this category. The next category relates to shipping fraud. And of course, as you can see, it has to do with cases when the wrongdoing is tied to the shipping. So for instance, sellers that decide to ship only some of their products, or sellers that do not ship their products. And it even goes as far as sellers that provide fake or reuse tracking numbers. It causes a very unique situation where the buyer is tracking a package and thinking that the package is on its way, whereas he, in reality, is not tracking his package, he is just tracking a package. And of course, it delays his claims of late shipping or not receiving the item, and it causes a lot of trouble for the marketplace. The third category is about account and KYC issues. So the fraud cases here are related to the real identity of the seller and to the ways that can violate marketplaces' T's and C's, like creating duplicate accounts, or even creating stores with the sole purpose of reselling them afterwards, rather than engaging in e-commerce. The last category is about shenanigans to impair the free competition by either damaging competitors, like bad reviews to competitors, or creating elusive situation when competition by operating multiple stores. So a buyer will think that there are many stores that sell this product and there's a real competition. In fact, it could be a single seller who operates multiple stores. This category also includes cases of collusion that we mentioned earlier. And these are cases when the seller and the buyer are the same. And such cases can result in the seller bidding on his own products just to increase the price, or leaving positive feedbacks to himself, again, to maximize his income. A very important and crucial thing to remember here is that more than 70% of all the fraud and abuse incidents are committed by returning bad actors, meaning that most of the fraud is repeatedly committed by the same fraudsters that keep on returning to the marketplaces under new identities. So if we could find a way to mitigate these returning bad sellers, we would eliminate more than 70% of the fraud. And in fact, we see this cycle when fraudster is being shut down, the store is being shut down, and then the same fraudster comes back to the marketplace under a new identity and a new set of details. COVID-19. So the global pandemic is also creating opportunities for fraudsters, of course. We have more buyers that are now buying online and less buyers in physical stores. We have more products that are now in high demand. And both these factors are leaving more room for fraudsters to maximize their profits and offer counterfeit items, ship not as described items. And sometimes it also comes to necessity when people have no other things to do, so they decide to engage in wrongdoing. To the main trends that we see. So the main trends that we see on the rise, especially due to the COVID-19 situation, have to do with bad listings like counterfeit or unsupported or even illegal items, have to do with collusion. So brushing, for instance, is a case when a seller is buying his own merchandise just for the sake of leaving positive reviews. Has to do with dodgy practices. This is when a seller uses games and shenanigans to outplay his competitors, like creating duplicate accounts, commit excessive violations, or creates accounts with the sole purpose of selling them afterwards. So he's not about selling merchandise, he's not about e-commerce, his business is just creating good stores to sell them. And the last type of trend that we see on the rise is, of course, shipping issues. We see various games and sophisticated attempts to either not ship or ship the wrong items. A very interesting case we witnessed in the last year was when a seller actually created a website of a fake shipping company, provided his buyers tracking numbers of this alleged shipping company. The buyers were tracking their items on this website, but nothing ever existed. There's no such shipping company. These tracking numbers never existed. The buyers were thinking that the packages are on the way, but nothing was ever shipped. So this is a very clever and sophisticated way, but we see various other techniques to defraud the system as well. So now I would like to hand the mic over to Mirav to elaborate on how sophisticated is buyer fraud.
Thanks, Max. And actually, much like seller fraud, buyer fraud has also shifted due to COVID and the erratic shopping behaviors that came with it. These new to e-commerce habits resemble to merchants, a behavior which is usually regarded as fraud related. So now vetting good orders becomes even more challenging. Let's look at some of these new trends. Shipping times. We all know that working from home uprooted all our normal routine, scheduled activity, and we saw a shift in the time where consumers were now shopping, primarily overnight and workday hours where there's no boss looking over your shoulder, right? So for merchants using the manual review teams, this meant sometimes more declines, and at others, more friction and an overall bad customer experience due to lack of fraud teams in these shopping times. Another thing we saw is the large increase in gift cards sales. Storefronts were shutting down, and we saw a big increase for three main reasons that we could spot. The first is providing aid to those who were negatively impacted by COVID. So people were sending gift cards, as an example, to their loved ones who lost their jobs. This was reflected very much so in food delivery services, which had the largest increase in sales during this pandemic, and also gift cards. The other reason is that customers were buying gift cards to save businesses. So the philosophy behind that was that buying a gift card now and using them later would help the company generate revenue during these tough times. And of course, gift giving. As shipping has been delayed and a lot of the physical goods were not arriving on time, couldn't be picked up from the stores because of certain restrictions, gift cards were a good solution. They provided an easy avenue to give gifts directly via email without leaving the home and without experiencing delayed shipping. So overall, merchants were experiencing a lot of new gift card orders, a ton, which are digital good, and they had a huge need for real-time decision-making because gift cards, again, digital goods, are riskier and easier to manipulate. And for the least surprising, yes, biggest challenge for merchants during these times, we know that first-time customers has peaked. I want to show you some of these numbers now. So new customers to us are those customers that we see for the first time on the Riskified ecosystem. It means those who had no history with us, have never created an account with any of our merchants. These could have been new customers that usually shopped in traditional brick and mortar shops and had to move online as stores were closed or had shopping restrictions, like we saw at furniture companies. Another example, in Q1, we saw new customer orders increase by over 120% among grocery merchants. And in this sector, fraud attempts peaked in late March and April, rising by 40 to 60% relative to January and February of 2020. When we're looking more deeply at these newcomers, we can understand some of their vulnerabilities. Such one group is the baby boomer, loosely defined, who are gems for e-commerce sellers because they have long been considered above average earners and spenders. But they came to e-commerce very naively and are prone to phishing scams, as an example, that we've seen an increase in during the pandemic. And fraudsters actually don't stop there. They manipulate also on psychological effects of the pandemic. Loneliness and isolation make older adults more eager to communicate. I'm sorry to say, it diminishes sometimes the ability to think critically, and it makes them more susceptible to social manipulation and what we now call pandemic-related scams, with fraudsters pretending to be with the CDC or the World Health Organization and other official agencies. They manipulate and the customers to provide information that they can be identified by, such as social security number and login details. The second category is lapsed customers. So these are customers that Riskified has seen in the system previously, but for a long time, over a year, they didn't shop with us. They returned to shopping online as the pandemic hit. So to successfully welcome all these newcomers, new products, and new shipping habits, the merchants must understand how to offer them safe and seamless for a great shopping experience. And why do I stress this experience? Because fraud is not just about stopping the bad actors, it's also about allowing the good ones through. We saw that these new to e-commerce shoppers started by buying small and more frequently. But what's important to note here is that we've also seen returning customers spend more and use a lot of payment methods. How much more? We actually saw a 41% increase in orders from returning customers through online from Q1 to Q2 in 2020. That's a big number. So what we want to say here is that lifetime value of the customer is really in focus when we talk about fraud. And what do I mean by that? New customers are the riskiest. Merchants don't know them, and they a lot of times will get scared by inconsistencies and suspect them of fraud. For example, new customers using a credit card issued in the UK, buying on his mobile that is pinging in France, and they're buying a one-way airline ticket for a plane that leaves in 3 hours for an expensive flight from Switzerland to Amsterdam. It's a lot of mismatches, right? But we all know that during the early days of the pandemic, you could make sense of this story because expats, for example, were scrambling to go back home before the lockdowns. So one of the challenges of this new trend is that without previous history, the sellers are flying blind with little or no digital footprint, and merchants can end up falsely declining good customers due to this fear of fraud. And declining the good orders can lead to a bigger loss when we know that 81% of customers reported they're very likely to switch to another company if they had a bad customer experience. So the domino effect for merchants means that 42% of e-commerce fraud losses are a direct result of the fear of fraud. And we can talk about how to handle that a bit later. But in this chaos, our data already shows an uptick in fraud from Q1 to Q2 of 2020. And as the year progressed, we also recorded a shift in the type of the goods the fraudsters targeted. So sectors that were previously considered safe were becoming riskier. We saw in furniture in India, or sneakers became safer, and they were considered very risky before. So there are a lot of shifts in that as well. I also want to talk about a surge in account takeovers, also known as ATOs. So fraudsters also read the morning news. They also know about these lapsed customers that we were talking about, the returning ones that are very valuable. And they're a golden opportunity because they know that ATOs will be hard to catch. Lots of long time no see customers came back. Accounts that weren't active are now becoming active. And why are these ATOs so successful? One of the reasons is that it's hard to spot them. These attacks are lucrative for fraudsters who bank on the victim's existing relationship with the merchant. So, including a history of good orders, they can bypass a lot of fraud prevention measures. And let's look at some of these examples as we see them. The pandemic gave a hard hit to the global economy, Max, as you said before, and lots of people lost their income. And as unemployment rates soared and lockdown restrictions and new opportunity for jobs were scarce, people looked for an easy, quick, lucrative work from home opportunity. And as we scan the dark web from time to time, we can see here that these screenshots taken from recent months show that there's forums and chat rooms, and they blew up with credit card fraud 101 and requests for how to do sessions. And fraudsters are very cooperative between and amongst themselves, and they help each other out. So, one of the main reasons that credit card fraud grew in popularity during Corona is that you don't have to leave your house. And in addition, people think that credit card fraud is almost a victimless crime. So people who would not commit violent crimes might be open to committing credit card fraud. And our seasoned analysts saw many career changes like this, unfortunately, in our systems. I want to take you through an opportunity for these ATOs with a bit of the twist. As an example here, how are fraudsters challenging the system by targeting an account rather than a product? See here, the merchant's accounts are hacked. And of course, they buy this information on the dark web. So once the fraudster has the login detail, they sign into the victim's account. They then place an order using the stored payment, shipping to the customer, in this case, the victim's address, buying non-risky products. After the order is approved, they actually cancel it. But instead of asking for a refund on the credit card, they ask for store credit. So now the fraudster has a stolen account with store credit in it. So they will sell the account for a much higher price on the darknet. Want to see one of these orders in our system? This is what it actually looks like. So you can see a customer created the account 2 years ago. The credit card was used 1 year ago with the same customer. Billing and shipping address matches. But here they're buying 30 cat hammocks. You can see this is a perfect order. Everything matches to the customer. This is the fraudster's goal. They need to create an order that will be approved, and the product or shipping doesn't matter to them since they're canceling the order anyway, right? The only thing that's here for the human eye out of order is that very few legitimate people actually order 30 cat hammocks. But this is difficult for the model to catch since it's a traditionally safe product. And what are we seeing here? That once the account has store credit in it, it can be again sold on the dark web. And when accounts are usually sold for $5 to $10, here it could go for $100 because it has the store credit. It means that the fraudster was able to make an extra $90 without having to commit any additional hack or virus writing or even leave their house at any time. So let's look now at what the merchants can do. So the best way to stop these ATOs is at the initial login of the fraudster. Since this is indeed a fraudulent login attempt, the ATO prevention product is the best way to stop it. Once the fraudster can't log in, it stops the entire flow. They can't even sell, they won't sell this account without the store credit in it. Max, I'd like to bring it back to you to show us also about the seller fraud.
Thank you, Merav. So back to seller fraud. The key indicator in detecting seller fraud and collusion fraud is basically by understanding the patterns, the behavioral patterns. And one of the things that allows us to better understand the patterns, is the fact that sellers operate across multiple marketplaces, both legit and fraudulent sellers. So, for example, for small marketplaces, 90% of the sellers are also operating on additional marketplaces, whereas for giant marketplaces, 70% have stores on other marketplaces. This is very important for us as it gives us more data and a much better visibility to the seller's ecosystem. It allows us to understand the operations, and when we understand the operation, it is easier for us to detect fraud, to detect abuse, and other abnormalities. This visibility also allows us to trace the funds, to identify the ultimate beneficiary, who, by the way, might not be the account holder or the store owner, and profile such patterns. And when we profile these patterns and understand them, we design detection and prevention mechanisms that are able to prevent this kind of fraud, that are able to detect this kind of fraud with a high accuracy and very low false positives. And let's see an example of visibility from different standpoints. So what you actually see on the screen now, these dots represents different store. These dots represent different stores, right? A marketplace would see here 127 independent and unrelated stores. Whereas giving our unique data sets and visibility, we are able to see here only 25 sellers, where each seller operates multiple stores. Now, of course, groups vary in their size, and the existence of groups does not necessarily mean that it is fraud. But it's a very effective way to analyze and investigate fraudulent cases. It's a very effective way to understand the entire ecosystem. And to give you an example of actual fraud, here you can see bad actors. You can see bad stores that were shut down by the marketplace. Now you can see here 25 stores that the marketplace has identified as bad, as fraudsters, and shut them down. And what happened immediately, that all these sellers created new stores on the same marketplace. So we started with a group of 25 and ended up with a group of 58, which means that, as we mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, these are returning bad actors. The same fraudsters that were shut down and terminated are now have more stores on the same marketplace using different identities and different data. And what allows us to detect groups and what allows us to understand the entire ecosystem is the use of connections or links. So stores and sellers can be connected if they share an element or more. An element or a data point can be either an online or an offline element. So for instance, a device fingerprint or an IP address or a physical address or even a behavior. The more data points sellers or stores share, the stronger they are connected. And again, as I mentioned before, connections by themselves do not necessarily indicate fraud. There are many legitimate reasons for sellers to be connected, like business partners. But yet, if we know that a store is fraudulent or a seller is a bad actor, it is much more effective to look on the entire group of stores that the same seller is operating. And this, as we mentioned at the very beginning, will allow us to decrease the fraudulent incidents by more than 70%, as this is the percentage that represents returning bad sellers. And in fact, when we analyzed historical fraud incidents, we could see that almost 70% of the incidents are group incidents. These are not standalone incidents in terms of a single store, but a group related incidents. An actual example of a case is something that you can see now on the right side. So you can see different stores and different months in a year. And the seller here has created multiple stores. Now the marketplace has notified us in late August, which allowed us to prevent the creation of the 2 additional stores in September and November. So we detected the attempt and blocked it. But have the marketplace notified us even earlier, like in June or July, we would have prevented the stores, the 4 stores that the seller has created in August, and mitigated this risk for the marketplace and spared the financial loss. This is how important are connections and how they allow us to uh, prevent and decline returning bad sellers. So I would like to give it back to you, Mirav, to discuss the data points across the buying process.
Thank you, Max. So, yes, we've seen how sophisticated fraud trends emerged as fraudsters tried to hide within the chaos of the pandemic. So, how can merchants stay ahead of the game? To address a growing problem, merchants must first understand the MOs of the fraudsters, what they use, and they need to adapt the fraud prevention strategies to address them. And it's no secret here that technology is key. Fraud prevention technologies that seize the end-to-end process and rely on machine learning models for real-time decisions are an excellent match for the industry that prides itself on being fast delivery, fast communication. So this is key here. And when we look at using the power of the technology, we look at strong customer network that can share data linking to help merchants accurately choose between the bad actors and the good actors and adapt to changing order patterns even when the sales skyrocket. And the power of Riskified's network allows us to connect customers across all merchants to understand the customer's typical buying or fraudulent behavior. As I talked about gift cards before, you can see here the overlap of customers within a single gift card merchant across all of Riskified's industry. The larger the circle here, the more overlap. While you may expect gift card purchases to have the largest overlap with other gift card merchants in the industry, we actually see the largest overlap within fashion and within retailers. So a customer that is new to the merchant site is likely not new to Riskified. And that customer could have been shopping in our retail and fashion merchants for years. Typically, we see that over half of the new merchant orders are linked across the merchant system. So new customers in your merchant is not new to Riskified, allowing us to take more risk. When we look overall at the changing world, I want to leave you with one key takeaway. Use technology partners and use them right. As you're working hard to meet the ever-evolving customer experience requirements in order to win and to remain relevant, and as we're seeing that trust is a valuable currency, make sure you leverage your partners that use advanced machine learning algorithms to identify good customers accurately and quickly. Comprehensive review of data will not only fix the leaks and ensure shoppers are converted to happy customers, but they will also give you a full vision to uncover tailored business plans and strategies. So, Max, I'd like to now thank you for having me with you and for all of you for being here. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email us as our email addresses are on the screen right now.
Thank you, Mirav. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.